welcome everyone. We've got a whole day of events today addressing the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And so without further ado, I'll just give you a sense of what we're doing. We'll spend this first hour with my colleague here, Dr. Oleksandra Wallo. She's our Ukrainian studies specialist here at KU. And she'll talk for about 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll do Q&A after that. And we'll take a little break. And then we'll have my colleague, Vitaly Chernetsky, who'll talk a little bit more broadly. He's also a Russian and Ukrainian studies colleague in the Department of Slavic and Eurasian Languages and Literatures. And he'll talk a little bit about Ukrainian identity, the challenges, the difficulties over the years, and do more kind of historical background of the situation. And that'll be from 11 to 12. And then I will be here 12 to 1, and I'll talk about contemporary Russian reactions to the war and the protests, the opposition, the concern. So that's what we got. And I forgot to introduce myself in all of this. I'm Annie Kokopova. I'm chair of Slavic and Eurasian here at KU. And so we're doing the teach-in, and then at 2 to 3:30 we'll have a panel of experts from a number of different departments, political science, history, and Slavic and Eurasian, where we address kind of different perspectives on what's happening right now. So without further ado, Dr. Wallo.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. This is a very difficult time for me. I am a Ukrainian. I'm a Ukrainian citizen. I have a lot of family in Ukraine. It probably has been the hardest week of my life. So this cannot be kind of a dispassionate account of what is going on because I just don't have any distance from what's happening. I'm online following events all the time. I'm on the phone with my family and friends in various parts of Ukraine. And they're telling me these horrendous or, on the opposite side, heroic stories. And I just don't know how to process all of it. So my hope is that today I can basically give you a short overview of my perspective on what's going on in Ukraine right now. Without getting too much into the reasons why it's going on, my colleague Vitaly Chernetsky will get into the historical and cultural reasons a little bit more in the next hour. And I hope this is helpful from this is more of an inside perspective as far as I'm able to communicate it living in the United States now. So, as you know, the invasion itself started early morning on February 24th in this year, just a week ago. And it was a full-scale military invasion by Vladimir Putin, unprovoked, grounded in his own completely false revisionist view of history, motivated by his desire to reconstitute the Soviet Union, to return to the past, and also, I think, motivated by his hatred of the values of freedom, democracy, human rights, the values on which the free world stands today, and Ukraine stands as well. Ukraine has been an independent state since 1991, for 30 years, more now. And it has really struggled through many various trials to gain democracy. And it has succeeded. And I think this infuriates Putin, who's trying to basically turn the clock back. So in this week, today is day 7 of the invasion, and I'm sure a lot of you are following these events, and some of these things I'm going to be saying will be familiar, but maybe some will not. But as of this morning, according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there have been over 2,000 civilian Ukrainians killed, including dozens of children. This is across Ukraine. This does not include, of course, the forces, the military forces that are fighting, like lions, seriously, this incredible large army. In addition to that, I'm sorry, not sure what happened here. In addition to that, maybe you can help me out here. Over 660,000 Ukrainians have fled their homes. Many of them are from eastern, central, southern Ukraine. They're fleeing either to western Ukraine and staying there, and I'm from western Ukraine, I'm from Lviv, Ukraine, so my own city has right now turned into a hub for receiving displaced people from other regions of Ukraine. Or they are trying to cross the border, especially the border with Poland, and move to other countries, at least temporarily. Right here. So before we go on, I wanted to ask you if maybe you could join me just in a brief moment of silence for all of these lives lost already in only a week. And then we'll move on. So if you could please stand up and we'll. Thank you. Thank you. So in the months leading up to this invasion, Putin amassed tremendous forces, incredible amount of troops and weapons on all sides of Ukraine, and you can see the map of Ukraine here. They were stationed in the south, in the already occupied Crimean Peninsula. They were also stationed all along the border with Russia here in the west, in the east, and also in Belarus. And his pretext was military exercises for months and months. They were going on. There are also a lot of ships in the Black Sea, the military fleet. His spokespeople assured that they have no intention of invading Ukraine, so this was completely treacherous on their part. And in the beginning of the war, they also boasted that they would be able to take Ukraine, basically invade the entire country in a matter of days, and take Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, which you can see here on the map, right in the middle, in a matter of hours, and do the same with Kharkiv, here in the east, the second largest city in Ukraine, as well, in a matter of hours. And to tell you the truth, I was also watching the Western media, the American media at this time, and there were, conversations between military experts who were saying similar things. Like they were looking at how many troops were amassed on the Russian side, and how many what was the strength, the power of the Ukrainian military compared to Russia. And of course, just by looking at that, it's an unmatched force, that there are fewer Ukrainian troops, there is not as much weapons in Ukraine, and they would say the same thing. They would kind of, this very dispassionate way, say, well, this will fall in a matter of this many days, and this will fall in a matter of this many hours. And I was watching it, and I had two feelings. One, these are real people you're talking about. These are not chess pieces you're moving on a chessboard. And two, you don't know Ukrainians. You may have all of these rational arguments about how this will unfold, but the factor that no one took into account, not Putin, not the West, not even some Ukrainians, is that it's not only weapons and numbers that matter. It's also the reasons why people are fighting. And I think what we all are discovering in these days is that Ukrainians have put up a tremendous fight. They have all mobilized around the country, even in the regions that are peaceful for now, relatively, and they're doing whatever they can to resist this onslaught, telling me that they're willing to die for their country, for the freedom, for the values that are Western values. So, because Putin was unsuccessful in taking Ukraine swiftly, as he was hoping for, he unleashed a tremendous rocket fire. He used missiles to basically bomb civilian residences, the streets in the major cities. Here in this photo, you can see a residential building in Kyiv, which was hit by a rocket just a couple days ago. It's probably going to collapse now, but there are videos online of people who lived in these apartments standing by it just in shock, watching and not understanding what has happened. He is attacking civilian infrastructure. He is using prohibited bombs, cluster bombs, vacuum bombs. Don't ask me what those are. I don't really know. I had to learn a lot of this military terminology in just a week. And he's basically committing war crimes in these cities for which he and his military leadership will be responsible. So in the past 2 days, Kharkiv, the largest city of Ukraine, especially has been under very, very heavy fire. Here you can see the central square in Kharkiv called Freedom Square. A lot of the central squares in major Ukrainian cities are called freedom squares because that's one of our basic values. And Freedom Square doesn't look like this anymore. A part of it looks like this. Because a government building was one of their targets, they shot it with rocket fire and they destroyed it. According to Miroslav Marinovich, who is a founding member of the Ukrainian Helsinki group, and this is a group that was established in the 1970s to kind of as a watchdog in matters of human rights. So according to him, quote, "Today Kharkiv is turning into Grozny, and Grozny is the capital city of Chechnya, and he's referring to the Chechen wars. This is pure horror. Russia had no consequences for Grozny from the international community. We just hope that it will have consequences for it now." I just found out this morning that they have also unleashed missile strikes on the Karamzin National Kharkiv University, which is now caught fire. It's one of the most prestigious, really well-known universities in Ukraine. Can you imagine being a university student, being a faculty member, and watching all of those buildings go down? Kyiv is also under attack. You may have heard on the news that the plan is to surround Kyiv on all sides and basically lay a siege to Kyiv. There was a strike, a missile strike, on the TV tower in Kyiv. You can see the smoke billowing here in the photo. The TV tower is very close to the Babin Yar Holocaust Memorial in Kyiv. And if you know the history, in the Babin Yar, during the occupation of Kyiv by the Nazis, tens of thousands of Jews were shot or buried alive in a big ravine, and Yar is the Ukrainian word for ravine. So the Ukrainian president and other officials are saying that Babi Yar is being killed again today with rocket fire from the Russians. In the strike on the TV tower, 5 civilians died because they were just happened to be walking by, right? So you may have heard that a lot of Kyiv residents are now spending their nights in the subway station. Kyiv has one of the deepest subway stations in the world, and they're subway systems in the world, and so they are just making it their bomb shelter. But you have to get out once in a while and get food and water and supplies, but it's not safe. So all of these terrible events have really caused an outcry of support from the world, for which all Ukrainians are grateful. I think people around the world realize that A, this is such an injustice, and B, here is this peaceful nation that has given up its nuclear arsenal and has been guaranteed by the large Western powers and by Russia that its territorial integrity and sovereignty will be preserved in exchange for this giving up of the nuclear arsenal. And yet, all of those promises don't mean anything, it turns out. So there was such an outrage among the citizens of the world, and many, many people came out to protest. The Atlantic called this past weekend a weekend of global protest against the invasion of Ukraine. So in the United States, one of the first cities to react was New York City. There's a very large Ukrainian diaspora there. You can see a photo from the protests there already from the first day of the invasion, February 24th. And some of these photos include my family members. I have family members from Ukraine who live in New York City, and they're participating in organizing these. There are protests in London, Tokyo, Lisbon, Boston, Tbilisi, Tehran, Baku, Mexico City, Prague, New Delhi, you name it. They also came here to Kansas. On Saturday, there was a large rally in Kansas City. The Ukrainian Club of Kansas City organized this rally. I'm one of the members in the club. We were hoping for maybe 50 people. We got 500. People, not just Ukrainians, but anyone who was moved and horrified by the situation came out to protest. And then on Sunday, we also had a protest in Lawrence. Maybe some of you saw it as you were driving by on Mass Street. And again, lots of people came out, over 100 of them. This, of course, is wonderful. I think Putin inadvertently has unified the West and has kind of revitalized some of these feelings of unity, solidarity, which is great. But at the same time, Ukraine is still fighting alone this war. I was especially moved to see this photo from Berlin, from the very large protest in the center of Berlin. Over 100,000 people came out to protest. And the reason I was so moved is because Germany has been very reluctant to give aid to Ukraine and has explained it as caused by feelings of guilt and shame for World War II. And yet, in the recent days, they have had a turnaround as well. They have decided to give aid to Ukraine. They may be perhaps under pressure from the citizens as well. I hope so. So, a lot of people have come up to me, have emailed me, have written to me, and have asked, or have expressed to me their admiration of brave Ukrainian resistance. And they have asked, like, where is it coming from? How is it possible? So I wanted to just give you a few thoughts on this, and then later on in the next hour, we'll have more on this from my colleague, Vitaly Chernetsky. But maybe you have seen this, I think it was the day before yesterday, before the performance of one of their operas at the Metropolitan Opera. There was, the whole cast came out on the stage and they sang the Ukrainian anthem, kind of in solidarity with Ukrainians. I wanted to show this to you for just a little bit. this is unprecedented. I don't think I could ever think that the Ukrainian anthem would ever be performed by the cast of the Metropolitan Opera. And it's a wonderful gesture of solidarity. They're singing in Ukrainian, but what they're singing is here on the slide, translated roughly. It's not a very pretty translation. But the first stanza of the Ukrainian anthem reads like this: Ukraine's glory and freedom are not yet dead. Fate will still smile on us, fellow Ukrainians. Our enemies will perish as dew does in the sunshine. We two brothers will live happily in our land. And so then it goes on to say, we'll not spare either our souls or bodies to get our freedom, right? And a lot of these words are acquiring a new meaning today. There are people actually doing what the anthem is promising, pledging that they will do, in the thousands. The anthem is old. It comes from the middle of the 19th century, which shows you that Ukraine has had a long struggle for independence. This was the anthem of the Ukrainian People's Republic that was proclaimed in 1917 at the end of World War II and in the beginning of the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution in Imperial Russia. Ukraine was independent then for a few years, and then it fell to the Bolsheviks. So the anthem has a long history, but I do think it explains at least a little bit, gives a little bit of a window into how this is possible. I wanted to briefly give you a few examples of kind of heroic actions, if you will, or just how Ukrainians are banding together to resist. I'm sure the most famous example by now is President Volodymyr Zelensky's own resistance. As you know, he was supposed to be assassinated according to Putin's plan. Yesterday, information came out that Putin had sent an elite Chechen squad to Kyiv to assassinate Zelensky and his family and basically clean up, to use a horrible euphemism, the government of Ukraine and make them fall into submission. Zelensky was offered to be airlifted by the United States. He refused. He said, I'm staying right here. And I think it gained a lot of admiration all over the world, including from Ukrainians themselves, who honestly were not expecting this from him. Not everyone was very happy with his presidency before. But when it comes to crunch time, Ukrainians do stand up and they defend their basic values. A lot of famous Ukrainians joined the defense forces. Here I have some photos. Here on the left, in the upper left, these are members of a Ukrainian, very popular Ukrainian band called Antitila, musicians. They have exchanged their musical instruments today for guns, and they're joining the forces to resist. In the center of the slide, there is this man in the front is the former president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, who is also participating today in the defense of Kyiv. He has joined the forces of the territorial defense and is also buying with his own money weapons and various other supplies for his unit because they didn't have very much. And then the photo on the right features Oleksandra, a former Kremlin prisoner from the Crimea and also an award-winning filmmaker who also joined the defense forces today to defend Ukraine. And these people are all serious that if necessary, they will die for their land. I wanted to touch briefly on the language question. Some people ask me, is this about the language? Is this about the ethnicity? I'll give you just one example, and I think it's also a famous example. In the very first day of the invasion, the Russian battleship approached a small island called Zmiyny Ostriv, the Snake Island, so to speak, and they ordered the border guards on this island to surrender. And they basically said, this is a Russian military ship. We are telling you to surrender. The response they received was, Russian military ship, go to hell. Now, the language was much stronger than that, and the actual original is here on the billboards. And this became kind of a rallying cry for Ukrainians. They are now putting this saying all over on billboards in the cities. They're also replacing the street signs that give directions which city is where with these kinds of signs. Putin het means Putin, go away, and then there are just these signs with Putin's face crossed over. There are all kinds of other examples of what people are doing today to resist this onslaught. I'll show you a scene from the subway station in Kyiv. You can see people are hiding there, waiting out the time of bombing. A lot of them are spending their nights there. They're playing music. Children are being born there. Surgeries are being performed there because sometimes they cannot get out for days. Even reporting is being done from the bomb shelters. So this is just a screen grab from the Ukrainian television. And by the way, all the major Ukrainian channels have banded together for these days, and they're doing a 24-hour broadcasting of what is happening. So here is one of them, one of the reporters, reporting in his suit and tie from a bomb shelter. You can see people behind him sitting right there. Everyone is participating. You can see here in the photo on the left, the elderly ladies, disabled ladies, sitting and making Molotov cocktails, because this is proving to be one of the weapons against all kinds of Russian vehicles. It's easy to burn them if you throw a Molotov cocktail at them. It's awful to say these things. I don't want this kind of violence. None of my people want this kind of violence, but you have to defend yourself. If rocket fire is falling on you, you have to defend yourself somehow. And then in the photo on the right, you see women making these camouflage nets. I don't even know what the right term is in English. They're weaving them out of strips of secondhand clothing that is being donated from all over the country. I called my mom 2 days ago. She lives in Lviv, which is not under rocket fire yet, thank goodness. And I asked her, what are you doing? Because she seemed very distracted. She was like, well, I'm cutting up these strips to make these masking nets. And we have now all of these supply chains established in the city. Your sister-in-law is going to the secondhand shop. She's bringing all of these bags with clothing. We're cutting them to specifications, a certain length and width, and then they're being transported to these other places, even bomb shelters, right, where people are making them, because this is one of the things in terms of supplies which the Ukrainian army is really lacking in. So there are all kinds of examples of everyday heroism in Ukraine. Here in this screen grab, you can see a man in Berdyansk, in southern Ukraine, carrying a mine he found on the road away from the people and houses with his bare hands while lighting up, holding a cigarette in his mouth. And everyone who's filming him is just in shock. But he has to do it, because otherwise it will explode. It might kill somebody. I'll show you another example. This is from Instagram. Ukrainians are posting about this every day. This is a scene of Ukrainians, rank-and-file Ukrainians, stopping Russian tanks and military vehicles with their bare hands. I'll just play a little bit of that. While singing the Ukrainian anthem. Crazy things. I never thought I would see this with my own eyes. Some cities and towns have been occupied or partially occupied, or they're being occupied now. One of the early towns that fell was Kupiansk in southern Ukraine. The Russians were able to take it because there were just no Ukrainian forces there, because they don't have enough forces to protect the entire border all around the country. What did the locals do? They organized a protest right away, right in front of the local city building with Ukrainian flags, singing the Ukrainian anthem, and yelling at the occupiers, telling them to get out. And I have to tell you, this is a Russian-speaking city. It's a Russian-speaking city. Putin is claiming that he came to Ukraine to liberate Ukraine and protect the Russian speakers and ethnic Russians from being killed and discriminated against and whatever. But the vast majority, if not everyone by now, in Ukraine, all the Russian speakers are so hateful towards him now because they don't need to be liberated. These are just complete lies. And the slogan I showed you before, telling the Russian ship to go to hell, is also in Russian. All of these communications between the two armies, they're all in Russian. A lot of the Ukrainian armies speak Russian to this day. So, to conclude briefly, I was moved especially to see this photo on social media. This is a Ukrainian resident. She is 98 years old. This is what it says. My name is Irina. I'm 98 years old. I lived through the Holodomor, the Ukrainian famine that happened in the 1930s and was a man-made famine engineered by Stalin. That's just an explanation. So I survived the Holodomor, I survived Hitler and the Nazis. I will also survive the Lilliputian Putin with his locusts. Slava Ukraini, glory to Ukraine, at the end. This is her form of protest, just the sign that she's holding up while sitting in her bed. She probably doesn't move much, doesn't move around very much, doesn't get out of bed very much. But this is how she's protesting. So literally, this has touched everyone in the country. So I'm going to wrap up and just direct you to one very recently established website. I think I heard about it this morning. This was a website, an official website of Ukraine about the war. It gives a lot of information about the reasons why the war is happening. It gives a timeline of the war. It gives brief news reports about what is happening right now in various parts of Ukraine. It's war.ukraine.ua. And all of the information there is monitored, checked for accuracy by the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So this is a reliable source of information in English. Please use it. Please share it. And I hope more people know about this. And I hope this can come to an end very quickly, very swiftly with the Ukrainian victory, because I think the world needs it. Not just Ukraine needs it, but the world needs it. Thank you very much. So we have some time for questions. I'm willing to respond to any questions you may have, but you should keep in mind I'm not a military expert. I'm not a politician. I teach Ukrainian language here at KU. I teach literature, culture courses. So there may be things I cannot speak about in an expert way. Yeah, please go ahead.
I will also share some questions that are coming in online too. So folks in the room, just feel free to raise your hand so we don't miss you as we're trying to get all of them.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Yes, so I think there is a question right here.
I noticed as you were flashing away from that one image, I guess, of Putin on the street sign, that he had a Hitler haircut and this.
Right.
Why is it so different?
Yes, so this is a comment, right? Did you have also questions?
I really like her plan, Lilliputian and Putin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, the camouflage strip things, I think many cultures in the world have some celebration during the year where they have something that looks like Sasquatch or Yeti or something.
Uh-huh.
And many militaries have some stealth guys snipers or something that occasionally wear those kind of suits.
Uh-huh.
I saw one of the Ukrainian soldiers on BBC, well, whatever,
Uh-huh.
not NPR, but television, PBS, had that kind of strips on his helmet.
Uh-huh.
So it is used, but I don't know the names for it. I think there's a bunch of different names for it, but I don't know the standard.
I don't know the names for these as well. Like I said, I'm learning all of this terminology as the conflict is unfolding in English, right? First in Ukrainian, in my own native language. I never thought I would have to learn it. And then in English, trying to find equivalents. Thank you. Thank you for those comments. I think there are questions.
Yeah, so the first question that we got online was somebody was wondering how we can find out more information about protests that are happening here and how we can participate.
Okay, it's a very good question. So a lot of these protests are organized by diaspora groups, such as the Ukrainian Club of Kansas City. If you're interested in local protests specifically, just go to the Facebook page for the Ukrainian Club of Kansas City. The page has grown tremendously recently, in the recent days. I think now they have something like 10,000 people signed up to the group. They are planning more events and more protests. Please join if you're interested. Please follow them there. I'm sure if you look up just Ukrainian protest, New York City, you will find some information, but I'm not as familiar with the organizations elsewhere. Vitaly may be able to answer this question better.
Yes, very quickly, everyone, there is a website called stopputin.net, which keeps track of all the protests around the United States, and I believe even in other countries as well. So our area is not alone. I know, for instance, our neighbors to the north in Nebraska had 2 big rallies in Lincoln and in Omaha, and they're happening all over the country in cities and towns, large and small.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Vitaly.
Thank you. And also just a comment, sending tremendous thank you to you, Dr. Wallo, for presenting and just saying that what you're doing is incredibly brave. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. Any other questions or comments? Is that a question? No?
One other
Okay,
from
go ahead.
online is, in addition to protesting, what are other ways that people can be supportive?
It's a very good question. There is I guess a page with a lot of links about ways to help Ukraine. So it's called something like 7 Ways to Help Ukraine Now. You can Google that as well. There, the page lists a lot of options for donating aid, donating money to various funds. There are humanitarian funds that help the refugees. There are funds that are gathering money for the armed forces of Ukraine because they do need a lot of supplies still. And there will be more. The National Bank of Ukraine, I think, just opened set up another account specifically to help, to donate humanitarian aid, to support the humanitarian aid in Ukraine. So one way is to help financially, if you can, and we're very grateful for any help that you can give. Another way is just to spread truthful information. What happens, I think, in contemporary society with how quickly we receive the news and process the news is that something like this explodes, maybe on the other side of the world. Everyone is really shocked by it. They follow it for a week, and then something else happens, and the attention fades from that first conflict. This is one of the fears Ukrainians have right now, that if this drags on, this initial wave of support may wane, right? And so it's important to talk to people who either are not aware of what's going on or maybe have some misinformation. Later on in the day, we'll have a segment on what was the Russian reaction to this, the reaction of citizens in Russia. They are under very heavy censorship. Facebook was cut off in Russia to prevent the information about the war spreading in Russia and being available to the citizens. So for many Russians, many of them don't know exactly what is happening, and many of them just don't want to know, perhaps even, but I think it's important to help them know, because they need to know. Because to an extent, this is also in their hands. They need to protest against this criminal regime. They need to do everything they can to stop the war. The West has been doing a lot to put pressure on the Russian government through sanctions and various other means. But unless there is outcry over these sanctions, unless the Russian citizens come out in millions and protest, nothing is going to happen. Nothing is going to change in Russia. They're just going to keep trying to take more Ukrainian cities and bomb more of them. So yeah, an informational campaign. If you can spread the information, discuss this with other people. It's a very important mission, if you will. Any other comments or questions? Yes.
I thought one thing I heard was really interesting was Ukraine produces a lot of wheat,
Yes.
probably more than Kansas, or maybe Saskatchewan or something, but.
Do you mind asking?
Oh.
Just so the people online can hear.
Oh, I thought one interesting thing I heard was half of the world's relief agencies, half of the wheat that gets sold to relief agency comes from Ukraine, which must produce a lot more wheat than Kansas or
Yeah.
even the leading provinces in Canada.
So it's true, Ukrainian is famously known as the breadbasket of Europe. It's a largely agricultural state. Even some of the varieties of wheat that are being grown in Kansas now originally came from Ukraine. They were taken here by the German Mennonite communities in Ukraine who moved to Kansas. The sunflower is the symbol of Ukraine, just like here in Kansas, the sunflower is the state flower. There are a lot of ties between Kansas and Ukraine, and I think it's good for us to be aware of them because it helps us feel closer to what's happening as well. Other? Yeah.
Question from online. What can we do safely to inform relatives and friends in Russia about what's happening in Ukraine?
Mm-hmm. Yes, another excellent question. Thank you. It's true that those Russians who are coming out onto the squares today, many of them are being arrested or beaten by the police. And this is going to continue and perhaps even intensify. Some of them are receiving very long prison sentences for coming out. So there are big stakes for them here as well. It's a big risk to come out and protest. However, I think there is a point at which you kind of need to overcome your fear and take a risk. And this is one of those points. And the first step is to know the truth, of course. So in order to communicate, I would use telephone. I would do it in private communications. I wouldn't necessarily do it on Facebook or other social media. I would text them, invite them to a Zoom call or a Skype or whatever. Or if you are able to meet with them in person here, if they live here, you can do it in person here. But yes, there is tremendous fear in Russia, but it's got to end. It has to end. And it will be important for Russians to also show to themselves that they can be heroes too, and they can overcome this regime. Yes?
Does the Ukrainian Orthodox Church support the Ukrainian movement, or they're probably pretty dependent on the Russian Orthodox hierarchy?
So
Do you mind repeating the question, just so people can hear online?
Okay, so the question is, does the Ukrainian Orthodox Church support Ukraine in this war? Do I understand you correctly? Yes. So the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, you may know, a couple of years ago, received something called Tomos. So now they're no longer part of the Russian Orthodox Church, right? They have their own independent Orthodox Church. They are very supportive, very supportive. In fact, a couple of, I read recently online that a few priests were killed just recently, also resisting the Russian forces. Yeah.
Another question, does Greece, the government of Greece, support the Ukrainians? Because they're pretty dependent on Russia.
Yes. I cannot answer that question and be like 100% accurate. I do not recall seeing any statements, overt statements from Greece that they're supportive. I think they are at least not saying no. And this is what's happening, right? Even in some of the places, some of the countries that are friends with Russia and Putin's regime, they're at least not saying anything or saying, no, we are gonna vote, we're not gonna vote yes or no, we're just gonna abstain in this situation. And this is their position, which I think is also telling, right? That they're refusing to jump on the bandwagon and go help Putin destroy Ukraine.
Vitaly, did you want to, sorry. Weigh in on that as well.
Yes, a quick commentary. In terms of Orthodoxy and Eastern Christianity, in addition to the independent, now recognized for several years by the ecumenical Eastern Orthodox community, there is still what is known as the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, and even those have made a very strong statement. So Metropolitan Onufry, the head of that church, wrote a very urgent appeal, and he specifically referenced in the Bible Cain and Abel, so that the Russian states talk of brotherhood and brotherly behavior is the behavior of the brother Cain, and that was an incredibly courageous thing to say for a cleric who is directly subordinated to Moscow. There is now a big fissure happening in Orthodox communities worldwide on whether to include Patriarch Kirill of Moscow in their prayer, in the liturgical recitation that we also pray for. And so this is a very tense and controversial situation within the global Eastern Orthodox community worldwide. I would say that the majority is very strongly supportive of Ukraine. And as for the specific question of Greece, Greece is one of the European Union member states, so it has adhered and supported all the measures that other EU member states have done. Similar things were done by Bulgaria, which is another Eastern Orthodox country, also historically with strong ties to Russia. Bulgaria is fully on board too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Vitaly.
So we have two more questions online. I know your hour's coming to an end here. The first is, what were your thoughts about Zelensky before and after the conflict?
Yes, I alluded to this before. I was not supportive of Zelensky before the conflict. And I heard a lot of similar opinions from my Ukrainian friends and family. When he was elected president of Ukraine, a lot of Ukrainians were skeptical that he would be able to do the job well because he has no political experience. As you know, his background is in entertainment. He was a comedian, a filmmaker, an actor, a stand-up comic. And it seemed like a joke, frankly, that he would become a president and could do this well. However, I think Ukraine is rediscovering their president now, just like the world is discovering who Zelensky really is. And everyone is very much behind him. And so I have tremendous respect for him, for his bravery, for his willingness to communicate with the West so effectively, and rally the whole world around Ukraine, basically, in this moment of pain.
And the last question from online is, couched in terms of understanding Putin's objectives previously in Venezuela. And so the question here is, what are his objectives in taking Ukraine, since we have seen his ambition around the world in other places?
Yes. So I do think Ukraine is a special case here, although there is clearly a pattern. Putin has fought so many wars already, and he hasn't been stopped. He's committed war crimes before in many various places, and he hasn't been stopped. It's for Ukraine, though. It's part of his dream of rebuilding the Soviet Union, and there can be no Soviet Union without Ukraine, or rebuilding the Russian state, kind of like the imperial Russia that would be powerful, reckoned with all over the world. And again, Ukraine was part of that state. It was colonized. And so for him, Ukraine is a different story. It's a much more specific story. I think there is also a great fear among his leadership, and in Putin specifically, that the example of Ukraine that has been able to build a democracy in the last decade or so, and has successfully overturned a rigged election during the first revolution, the Orange Revolution, and then successfully ousted a criminal president in the Euromaidan, in the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, all of this is threatening Putin's power because he's a dictator. And if there is a successful democratic neighbor next to Russia, a large neighbor whose citizens are enjoying very different rights and very different lifestyle, this will threaten him. This will threaten him, and it is threatening, as we can see. And finally, I think it's also a form of personal vendetta. Unfortunately, I don't know if you've seen the reports today about Putin's desire to reinstate President Yanukovych as the legitimate Ukrainian president. So this is the president who was ousted in the Euromaidan. But now, supposedly, Yanukovych is in Minsk already, and so they're kind of grooming him to come back in all glory and retake Ukraine. This is unheard of. I don't know what Putin thinks, and Ukrainians will never accept it. They will rather die fighting than they would accept something of this kind. But yeah, I think it's a much more specific story than any other stories of Putin's wars in recent years.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wallo.